back there. Good. And just for everybody watching right now, I'll be working on this guy today. He's an Ogre Mawtribe Stonehorn conversion. Working on him and the base he's gonna be on. It's like a Japanese kind of pagoda. Let's see if my mic will work if I don't put it up my butt right here. Just keep it as far out of camera. Just starting up. There seems to be a ton of people in here. Let me get the music up a little bit, guys, so you can hear it in the background when I'm not talking. What's everybody up to? Hang it. Going to, if you touch on that like ogre that's on his back, the dragon, I'm thinking I'm gonna do kind of a yellow and black for the armor, the samurai armor plates. I'm gonna go in with the yellow first. The ogres that I have a red skin tone, so I'm not 100% sure I'm gonna like the way the yellow looks with the red skin tone. It may be a very harsh color combination. They're too close, but that's why I'm gonna start with like an Averland Sunset, kind of an orangey yellow. It's not as bright and obtrusive like to start with. And I'm starting with an Averland Sunset Air paint because they're already kind of a thinner paint to begin with. And while I want to go over this, and I still want to add a little bit of water, but I want to go over it with a base and a layer paint anyway from GW. I'll start out with the air just to get paint on the model. And I started with a Zenithal highlight to kind of show me where I'd want the highlights and lowlights of the armor anyway. For those of you who are not familiar with what a Zenithal highlight is, if you look at the model, you'll see that the guy is very white, very bright. But if I turn him around, see there's a gradient to darkness, a harsh gradient to darkness. Hey, Jesse. So this is a conversion I'm making for a Ogre Mawtribe Stonehorn. It's my ogres are like an Asian samurai theme. So I have converted the rider to look like he's riding this dragon, and then his base I'm working on today is like a Japanese pagoda. So he'll be mounted like kind of like this, flying over the little Japanese house. I'm working on like iconography and lanterns, just little detail stuff. But just for today, for this like pre-show, it's gonna be like, I don't know, hour and a half, 2 hours. Whenever Marcus decides he's gonna get on and hang out with me, I'm working on the armor plates and the skin tone stuff for the riders. Yeah, very Mista Pandora. I can say that that wasn't my favorite expansion of WoW. I kind of fell off on that era. I was real big into the Wrath of the Lynch King. I played the crap out of that. It uh, it may have been just the era, like the age in which I was playing Wrath of the Lynch King was the age that could do stuff like that, and that's definitely the expansion I love the most. What are you up to, man? Are you painting today too? Caught you on the show yesterday. You did a great job. We should have you on more often. Yeah, Wrath of the Ledge King was my jam, man. Maybe some better lighting. I don't shine that directly into my face. I need to get myself out of that habit of going back and touching up uh, every little spot that I miss right off the bat, because I need to just get paint on the model right now. I can get in these weird circles where all I'm doing is running around touching things up and I'm not actually moving forward with anything. Yeah. Did you see the new buggy bikes that came out? I think either they came out yesterday or the day before. Those quads for the Primaris Space Marines. A couple things about them I think are just ridiculous. Yeah, yeah. Let your errors be your friend. That's definitely something I didn't learn until later on in my painting, like getting good with it. But and it's hard, especially like starting out. Like you make a mistake, you get a little bit of your yellow on your black, or vice versa, and you want to go back and immediately fix it. But then you fix a little spot, and you go back and you do some more yellow, and you get a little more somewhere else. Just it's an imperfect system, and you got to learn too. Like it's hard, or things I've learned. You probably already know it. You're a professional painter. I'm definitely not, but you're the only one that's going to look at your model as closely as you are right now. Like absolutely no one's going to be have their nose up the butt of my model, like looking at all this stuff. So some of the mistakes that I see, some of the little imperfections, like I can let them slide. They're not. I'm I'm not going to try and win any painting competitions. I'm not at that level yet. I'm just trying to paint my best paint job today. Yeah, I think you said you're going to convert your own quads. I think that the Speed Freaks Orc buggies would do great for those conversions. If you wanted to convert yourself up like a whole kind of like White Scar Mongolian riders kind of army, and then you do that all with the Orc war buggies, kind of like a Mad Max theme with the with all that stuff. Yeah, you learn stuff every day. You just 1% better. Every time you pick up a paintbrush, just try and be 1% better than the last time you picked up that paintbrush. That's all you can do. And then as you get better and better and better, and then talk to people. Kind of like I met you through John and Eric, and even just looking at your stuff or listening to you talk about painting yesterday, I'm learning stuff. You have stuff on that Morty's wings model. Like after you talked about it, I went and watched that video. By the way, Laughing Jester on YouTube painting studio. Oh, of course, my headset turns off right now because I can't learn to plug things in. Uh, see oh, behind the scenes a little bit in the idea that I don't plug my things in, so things die. But yeah, I was in the middle of plugging your stuff. Laughing Jester Studios. He has a great painting tutorials and stuff, but one video in particular that I went to and looked at and learned some stuff was on his Mortarion. He has a beautiful, like neon green to dark green, like fade on his Mortarion's wings, and it's beautiful. It is very well done, and even just looking at how he chose his colors for his color palette, uh, it's because the techniques he used are pretty simple, but I think a lot of people, they get into, like, they start off on the wrong foot by choosing colors that aren't gonna go well together, and they use them in a way that is kind of like uh, obtrusive to the eyes to look at. And no matter how well they paint, how clean their paint job, it's just kind of it's a hard thing to look at. I don't, like, for example, like people that paint with uh, colors on the opposite sides of color wheels. Like if I was gonna do this guy in a bright yellow, like I have right now, like I started with the Everland Sunset because I wanted to have some warmth in it and then work my way up to the Flash Gets Yellow. But if I wanted this yellow, which is kind of what I wanted to start with, and then I was like, oh, you know what would go really great with this yellow? Like some deep purple. So not only like am I going away from the brightness and the warmth of the color wheel, but I'm bringing in some like dark purple shades. It would be hard to look at. And some people, I mean, don't get me wrong, like your fun's your fun, but some people, they do all this time painting, they make it all clean, and then by the time they look at it and they sit back, they're like, oh, I really wish I would have chosen some different colors. So like, or I get it a lot where like, man, the thing in my head did not turn out to look like this at all. So what I'm doing now is I am slightly, while it's still wet blending the armor pads, just the edges of the armor pads with the Flash Gets Yellow air paint, because it's a little bit of a like a more watered down kind of liquidy thing. And I'm going to get kind of a nice warmer lighter tone to it. While it's wet, I could blend these two colors together a little easier than if one was dry. And again, I want to let my mistakes go. Like what Laughing Jester brought up earlier is like, let your mistakes guide you. If I see one of my edges are a little too bright, a little too light, I want to leave it and then work that into maybe another one. Take a second and look back at it to truly see, like, if this ogre was painting his armor with his big clumsy hands, what would it look like? Kind of go with it. I'm also blending a little bit of the Everland Sunset, or that darker orange color, on my wet palette into my yellow. Just to get like a mid-tone for some of this wet blending. Because while I'm talking, it's kind of non-conducive to the wet blending project in that the paint's drying a little too fast. So I'm getting a more harsh contrast between the oranges and the yellows. And it's not something I necessarily want. I don't want my guy to be the mustard warrior. I'd ultimately like this to be a lighter yellow. And while the blend of it hopefully will look better, another way you could achieve this, like if you didn't feel confident wet blending as much, but you still wanted this kind of tonality, get a little bit the brightening up the edges on the yellow armor plates. You wanted that tonality would be to go with a dry brush. Now, for people that aren't familiar with what dry brushing is, you take a bigger brush that's kind of beaten up. This is an example, kind of a wider, more frayed brush. You get the color you want. I wouldn't use an air paint for this. Sometimes I use air paints because they come thinner. You could add less water to them. But you get, this is some Flash Gets Yellow layer paint. Adding a little bit of paint to the brush. Then you're going to take it to a piece of paper towel or whatever you got to soak up paint. And you're going to get maybe 99% of the paint off. You're gonna start where it's dark, and then you're gonna kind of pad your brush until you can just kind of barely see the yellow coming off, which tells me that okay, this brush is loaded with paint enough to do the dry brushing technique. And then you kind of want to wait till the darker color underneath has settled, has dried, and you're gonna go like if you've ever eaten chopsticks, the same kind of like chopstick grip formation towards the end of the brush. And I like to wag kind of like an up and down motion. And I'm going to just kind of wag up and down these frills on the armor. And I'm going to try and get that yellow, that lighter yellow, just on the edges of that to pull it up. So originally I was going with the wet blending, and I liked the wet blending personally because it allows you to drag the colors together in more of an organic feel. Sometimes this dry brushing, while easier to do in many ways, it gives you like a harder edge or more of a glow pattern than wet blending gives you like a smoother transition. And after you get comfortable wet blending and you do it more often, you can control the way that those blends happen, and you can get a better, smoother transition in some of your colors. I see there's a couple people in chat like lurking around right now, which is fine. I'd love to see you guys and have you guys out, but feel free if you have any questions. I talk a ton and I talk a bunch and I love hanging out with you guys, but feel free to throw them out. I'm an open book. We're just hanging out in the pre-show before we have a conversion show going on later today that's going to talk about some conversions that one of our, like, he's as close to a master converter as I've ever met for Warhammer 40k, but his name is Marcus. He's a part of the team and he converts a lot of stuff. And then I'll be working on this Ogre Mawtribe's. He's my Stonehorn. My Ogre Mawtribe's army that I'm starting up has an Asian samurai ninja kind of theme going on to it. So this will be my Stonehorn, or the Huskarl on Stonehorn. I'll be working on him. Right now I'm just kind of I'm painting his armor pads. I'm getting him ready. I just got a Zenithal highlight done yesterday, and I'll be working on himself, and then thinking about in my head kind of what I want to do for his banner in the background, because I don't really know. I may do some research on different ogre markings. I tried to get the ogre markings on his base. Like, this is the base I have for him. Trying to get some of those all worked out. I may bring that up into the flag on his back, just to try and pull, I don't know, hit the base and the story of the whole model together in one. But it looks like some of the other pad have dried enough, and I can start going on with another layer of the Flash Gets Yellow. This time I am going to use the air-based paint. Oh, yeah, no problem. I appreciate you being here, Jesse. Doesn't matter if you go in and out or sideways, whatever works for you, man. Just be safe. Now, knowing that this is an air-based paint and that it's wet, I'm going to kind of go over the whole shoulder pad with it. I already have that Everland Sunset or the warmer orange paint in the background. And then I'm going to let this start to dry while I do the other two armor pads as well. It's going to pick up the gradient underneath of the lighter yellow and the darker orange in the yellow paint that is going on over it. So I'll have some of that gradient baked in, but the gradient is going to be of the Flash Gets Yellow. So I'll get a nice yellow color. And the reason I did this is because if you primed your models black and then you tried to do a yellow over top of them, a lot of times I get this like greenish color that comes out, and it's very hard, and it uses a lot of layers to try and get that green color to go away. And it's very hard to then afterwards shade your yellow without darkening it to a point where it doesn't look good anymore. It doesn't look yellow. It looks orange or it looks red. But here I was able to base an orange, do a couple layers. If I could light a little easier, I hold it up to the. So I was able to base the yellow, add some layering into it, and then like go over it with a thinner yellow paint to pull out almost like the thinner yellow paint almost acted like yellow contrast paint, in which it was translucent enough to show the shading transitions in the back. But I did it on top of an orange, which kept the color palette warm and kept the color palette in the yellows. So while this goes on, I think I'm going to start working on a different color, just let that dry. Start thinking about something else. Another thing I'm going to do is my ogre's skin. The skin tone on all my ogres is red. So this worries me a little bit because I know that red and orange can be, or red and yellow could be a tough color combination to try and pull off together. But I'm going to try and do this anyway, and then I'm going to see kind of how it comes off. I'm going to try and also, so that my guy doesn't look like the Wendy's warrior, I'm going to try and mute the bright yellow and the bright red with darker washed metals. Like, I'm not going to use a Runefang steel or a lighter steel color on him. I'm going to use more of a darker lead belcher that's washed with Nuln Oil or washed down. And on his gloves and his metal bits and stuff that I can pull off as black with maybe a lead belcher dry brush, I'm going to do that as well to kind of darken the tones on the palette down, be not so bright. Now for colors and stuff, You want the brightness of a model and the high contrast of the model to be where you want the person who's viewing its eyes to go. So, for instance, if I want people to be drawn to the rider, drawn to the face of the dragon, I would want the colors to be high contrast and bright in those areas, and more low contrast, more darker tones, more washed out on areas that I don't want them to necessarily be looking. Um, so for this, I'm going to try and make it so that the ogre's face gets more of a light dry brush when I get around to his face, and that the pads on his shoulders, his hat, and the top part of the flag gets a lighter dry brush than the rest of the ogre. You can kind of see this when it came to the dragon. I did another Zenithal highlight, so I sprayed the dragon with white primer on the top, and then black primer on the bottom, and then I used the contrast paint. So this is all one shade of contrast paint, but you'll get a gradient from light to medium to dark based on the undertone of just priming the bottom of your model black and the top of your model white. I get that gradient in color naturally. So it saved me a little bit of time. I'm not a super professional painter. I'm not going to enter any competitions with this guy, but I am trying to get, 1% better every time you paint. So working on that. So with I know Jesse's driving right now, so he's not painting, or I mean, he might be that good of a painter. He could be driving and painting, but if anybody else is working on something, I'd love to hear what you guys are working on. Or if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, kind of just a free form hangout and paint until our conversion show, which is happening later today. It's going to be about maybe 2.5 hours until that conversion show. But then we've got some smooth tunes in the background. New pretzel. I've been finding it. There's been some issues with copyrighted music and Twitch and channels being brought down. So I've been really looking for some royalty-free music you can play in the background while you're painting, while you're hanging out, while you're chilling. That way, it's not as big of a scare that they're gonna, pull your whole channel down just because some algorithm heard the hokey pokey in the background and I don't own the rights to that music. But I'm just trying to looking from different angles, make sure I have good coverage. I'm working with the red contrast paint right now. It's Blood Angels Red. Blood Angels contrast. It's just for the skin of the ogre. I'm going to use it so that when it dries, it'll show me where I need to highlight and where I need to shade a little better. I'm not going to use it by, you could just use it by itself and be like, I'm going to go and use these contrasts as my shade and as my highlight. And that's perfectly fine. If you're worried about getting this guy ready and put on the table as fast as possible, contrast paints are great for that. Your red will be red. It'll have some highlights, some lowlights. But if you're really trying to up your painting game, I think contrasts are a great tool for your toolbox, but they're not the end all be all you're going to still want to shade, you're going to want to wet blend, you're going to want to highlight. I'm going to need to get in there. Be careful how I get in there around the horn of the dragon. Careful that I don't get a bunch of excess red paint everywhere. So I'm trying start at my edge. So start at the edge in which I'm trying to paint from. And I know that the bracer on this guy is going to be the metallic color. I haven't painted it yet, so I'm not super worried about getting red paint on that bracer. But I'll start at that hard edge and then work my way out from it. There you go. And I could have, and I may go back, and I could paint this this hand as a glove. There is some precedent that you can't really tell when the bracer breaks the arm muscle to the hand. There's not enough detail in it to show if that is a gloved hand or not. Like you can't really pull or tell the fingertips if they have nails on them or not. So I can, if I see that my model looks a little too red, a little too bright, I can go back and paint some of these hands gloved to try and bring down this this contrast. Just to give you guys a little look at what I'm working on right now. It's starting to pull out what I'm worried about, which is that the yellows and the reds are gonna make him kind of look like a Ronald McDonald warrior running around on top. But I do feel like since I've only painted yellows and reds at this point, and I haven't touched on any of the other colors, that it's going to look this way, and I'll save my reservations on turning the ship around and picking some different colors and going over this differently until I've actually gotten more colors on the model for him. Now, something I should have done that I'm regretting right now is that I really should have not mounted this guy. Like, I got really into the conversion of this model and building this model and putting this model together that I wasn't really thinking like forward to actually having to paint him when I was converting him up. So I built him and mounted him on the dragon before I thought of, well, how am I going to paint inside this guy's armpit while I have this whole dragon and arm and armor and back plate and all this stuff to worry about. So it's a little bit of a regret right now, but I probably should have put him together separately and then worked on painting him separately and then mounting him on the dragon after everything was said and done. Because I'm already going to have to drill a few holes in the dragon in order to mount him on the base. So he's already not quite done to begin with. You live and you learn. We got some like interesting like like island guitar riffs going on in the background. I'm digging it. Like hey, well, I think I've gotten most of the skin. Oh, I'm missing a thumb there. Skin of this ogre, kind of all the way around. So I may work on some darker colors to try and get that, like, to fight the whole mustard warrior thing going on right now. How's everybody's Saturday going on okay? I had some drywalling I had to do earlier today. I mudded the drywall that we'd hung in the basement earlier, and that has been a nightmare to try and mud drywall. So it's been great just to be able to get done with it, or wake up early, start it, get done with it, and then kind of relax with a little bit of painting and hanging out. So I think for I've got Abaddon Black on the brush right now, and I'm going to go with the pants and the metallics, and I don't think his stand will be black. I think his stand will be a dark brown because I want kind of a contrast on from what he's sitting on to his legs. But I think I'll go ahead with getting the Abaddon Black on. Touch up spots too. Although I shouldn't. Should fight the urge, touch up things too early. There's also, when I'm thinking about what colors I want to paint things, I had the benefit of converting this guy up at the same time as converting his base. So there's some colors and textures and interesting stuff that came out of his base that I think would be interesting and beneficial to work up into the model as well. So, like, this model has his the banner flag on his back, and I'm sure it's kind of hard to see maybe in that light where you catch it. There's a flower on the banner, and the base has a cherry blossom tree with some cherry blossoms like on the ground. This stuff's gonna be bamboo. I'm still trying to work and figure out how I'm gonna finish off that. It originally was just pieces of wire that I had snipped, and I wanted to put some bamboo with some rocks and bushes, and then I'm still working on it. This is all still a work in progress too, though. Cleaning up the building was foam cut out of pink foam, and the wood is either popsicle sticks where you see the longer pieces, or it's like a dollhouse metal wire and like fencing, like dollhouse fencing for the smaller planks. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going at right now. And with that, with the cherry tree, I really like the cherry blossoms in the cherry tree. I think it adds like a little punch of color to the base that I wasn't getting earlier. Like, it had a lot of greens, it had a lot of browns, like an earthy tone. but the pink in the cherry tree really is very vibrant in a small detail way, and I really like that. So I'm thinking, while the dragon's green, and he does have some more vibrant colors in the dragon, I want to get a little bit of pink, maybe in the flag, maybe in I'll try some freehand iconography on an armor plate later on when I go into the detailing part of this model. But I want to try and pull that pink from the base up into the model. I've got just some of the equipment I'm using. So I've got the wet palette over here, just kind of a poor man's wet palette. It's just a sponge, a little piece of Tupperware with some water in it, wax paper on top. I've got a old piece of ceramic tile that I'm using if I want to try and mix colors on. Um, just a wet palette keeps colors like fresh and vibrant, but I don't have a whole lot of wet palette surface. So if I want to do like a big sweeping transition in colors, I'll do it on my tile. Then I've got my paper towel to help with mistakes. If I spill non oil, or if I want to dry brush, I'll get those details with the paper towel there. And then I've got a couple brushes with me today. I'm working on a bigger model, and I'm starting with kind of the base colors, the shades, the highlights. So I don't have any of my detail brushes pulled out right now, but I'm working basically with a medium-sized shop brush that has a decent tip to it, and I'm working on things. I do think I'm going to start with Abaddon Black on the metal, and then lighten it with a dry brush, because I really want to keep some darkness to the metal. Now this Abaddon Black is the air version. I think it'll be fine, because the air version, while it is a little more watery, once I wash it, it's on the white, the zenithal highlight. Once I wash it, it'll actually blend very well, because it, in and of itself, this Abaddon Black that's a little watery is kind of getting into the crevices and the darker spots where I want it anyway. Now there's sometimes that I like, you don't want to judge your model too early. So looking at it, I'm looking at him half done, and I need to realize that he's only half done. So things that are bugging me right now, I really need to like lighten up and just know that I'm gonna work on him. Those little spots I already know are going to be difficult to dry brush to highlight with the lead belcher later, but I'll have to get in there. I also noticed that there's some spots in here that are bone and not metal, so I'm gonna have to go in maybe with a darker bone color Or maybe the neutral bone flesh tone will help against the yellows and the reds. I don't want the bone to look orange amongst this color palette, so I'm gonna try and be cognizant of that. But we'll see how things go. Now with just the base colors on, just the yellow, just the red, just the black, no highlights, no washes, no blending, it the high contrast could make the model look not right, because not many things in our lives that we're looking at with our eyes are all just one color, like one red the whole way, one yellow the whole way, one there's always like differences in shading and highlighting. So kind of reserve the idea of when you look at it and you're like, oh, this is bad, and adding more paint's only going to make it worse. Like, just if you're still early on in the model, just push through that and get to a point where you're comfortable that you've done enough where you could actually start judging yourself. So looking at the stuff I've done, I've added the black to the there you go. I've added some of the black to his metal bits, and then if I go back in and I was thinking about also doing black in the ridges of the leather between the plates that hold the samurai plates together. And I may still do that. I may just use a brown, like a dark brown. It depends on if it's going to look too much like his pants in the end. But I think already, when it was just yellow and red, there were some issues that I had in my head looking at it. But now that it's yellow, red, and some of the other colors coming together, I feel like it's starting to take shape a little better. And I, of all things, have not grabbed... Well, I'm not actually done with the black. If I'm going to do all his metal, I need his feet as well. So his feet are also metal. Get that in. I think the black metal feet too will be a great contrast to the light bone horns and the highlight on his ear, on the dragon's ear that his foot is resting on, so that you could see like the dark metal behind it, and it will almost add like an artificial shadow. Kind of what I'm talking about in that foot that's there behind that guy's ear. Really, ultimately, what I want is I want the dragon to pop more than the ogre, because in the conversion, uh, everyone knows what the ogre looks like. Everyone knows an Ogre Mawtribe, and everyone who plays ogres at your tournament or at your conversion competition, if someone else brings an ogre, everyone's going to know what that is. But the dragon's the thing that's different. The dragon's the thing that no one's really seen before or dealt with or done anything with. So that's where I want the eyes to go. That's what I want the person judging my model to be drawn to first. since I haven't done his pants yet, it's not that bad. A little bit of paint up into his pants that I'm going to have to go over anyway. Now, on his pants, he also has some like satchels and bags. And I think I'll try and keep his whole lower half in the like rich brown earthy tones, because that'll keep people looking away from that up towards the high contrast of the yellows and the reds of his skin and of his armor plates, of his face, of his hat. I may actually, when we talked about earlier, bringing the pinks in from the base, I may do some of that on the hat, the like rice farmer's hat, because that'll pull the colors from the bottom of the model up to the top of the model. So when someone's looking at the base, they'll be like, oh cool, this is a cool thing. And then someone looks at that and takes that all the way up through the very top of the model. That will be the metal that I have on him, or at least the base coat on the metal, which is the black Abaddon. And I will need to get a darker brown color. I'm thinking maybe a Mournfang brown, maybe a semi-color palette like way back there. I keep all my, grab one real quick. So I'm back. I did end up grabbing a Mournfang brown. Come on. This one camera that I have for painting. Brown. So it's kind of got an earthy brown tone. It may not be as dark as I need it to be ultimately, but I think I could shade it down with Agrax Earthshade or a Nuln oil. That shade may help bring it down a little bit so that I could highlight again with the same color, or I could highlight with a lighter brown. I have a bunch of light browns up there, a bunch of tans. And the paint to the wet palette, then trying to get a good balance. I want the paint on the wet palette to constrict a little bit after I put the paint there, but not so much so that it forms pockets of and pulls away from itself. Get the paint on the model, because I want the paint to pull a little bit into the crevices when I put it on the model, but I don't want the paint to pull so much so that I have to go over multiple times just to get base coverage. You're going to want to do multiple thin coats anyway to get the richness and the color and everything. But you're not going to want to be forced to do that because even after 2 or 3 coats, your primer's still showing because you've watered your paints down too much. There's gonna, looking at this model, there's gonna be a decent amount of him that is actually brown. I may not go back and do those details in brown that I was talking about earlier, just because I don't want to overload model in the same color. And anybody who's hanging out right now, if they're working on stuff or they're painting or converting up anything, I'm down to hear about what you guys are working on. Even if it's not a 40K related project. I was doing housework earlier today, mudding for some drywall, and I'm so glad to be done with that right now. Move on to actually painting and relaxing a little bit. Drywalling and mudding is a not for me. Again, I'm hitting that same issue where I shouldn't have put this whole model together before I painted him. Because there's some issues I'm hitting. I'm gonna have to touch up a little bit, I think, on the dragon. Because in order to get paint where I need to get it, it's very restrictive. Then again, I'm not sure a judge is going to get his nose so far up my model's butt that he's going to see some of these spots. It's more for me and my mental health when I look, because everyone, when they look at their own models, they can key in on their own mistakes much quicker than what someone else would be able to see. Because they're taking in, someone who's looking at this model for the first time is taking in the whole thing all at once, where you're like, oh yeah, I know it's a dragon, I'm gonna look real deep in on, oh, this one leaf on the flower, like I messed up some wet blending or something, and that's where my eye's gonna go all the time. I'm gonna paint the saddle that this guy is sitting on at least in the same base color as the pants. And then I'm going to highlight them and wash them differently to pull them apart color-wise and to make them distinct. So I'll bring the pants up in tone, maybe warmer, maybe lighter. We can talk about that when it actually happens. And then I'll bring the saddle down in tone. I'll shade it down because it's lower on the model and it's farther out of the where the light source would be. If I shade it down, it'll look more like it's farther away from the light. Wow, there's the music changed tone real fast on this channel. Kind of a chiptune rock. I'm not sure I mean, I could be a fan and I could respect some harder rock, some metal, but when you add that kind of like auto-tuned kind of chiptune kind of sound to it, that's where you start to lose me. I could listen to some of this, but go ahead and there you go. So you don't have to deal with the starting to wear on me a little bit. Unless the last thing I need to do is start headbanging while I'm painting a model like this. Lighter. There you go. Kind of a step into where he's at now. See if I can get it to focus. Where he is right now. It's where I have to work on the browns in the pants, the reds in the skin. All of this is going to need highlights. It's all going to need shades. We'll be working on that in a second, but that's kind of where he is. So the bone and the metal on this model is still going to need another base coat. Other than that, I think for base coats on the model's rider, I think we're getting close to the end. The hat will need one. The hat will go separately at the very end. There's some details and some texturing I want to do for the hat to make it look like it's made of reeds. And I'm not 100% how I'm going to do that yet. So instead of trying something and failing at it and not liking, and then bringing that kind of attitude and that motivation or lack thereof into the rest of the paint. I think I'll just wait on the stuff I'm not 100% sure on and move forward on stuff that I do know how I'm doing or how I'm going to. So the next thing is the black that we put on earlier is dried. And I think we're gonna dry brush lightly so that it kind of looks like almost an edge highlight. Bring out some of the details. I am going to keep this in a lead belcher maybe. So this will be the same technique though for dry brushing. Get a little bit on my paintbrush. Get a bunch of it off. Just so that it starts to barely see it. Like you start seeing more of the texture of the paper towel and less of the paint. Then from farther back on the brush, just kind of up and down. The longer you do it, the more paint you'll get on the surface. The less you do it, the less of the highlight. But I think this is looking pretty good right now. I'm pretty pleased with where the lead belcher's going with my highlights so far. I may go back and actually put some lead belcher in some of these areas. Right now, even just the two-tonality of having the black Abaddon black and the lead belcher helps a ton in it. And I will actually, while I was just talking about it, I think I talked myself into it. So the dry brush is there, and the dry brush has helped me see where I want the highlights to go because the dry brush has pulled out those raised areas. I'm going to go in and pull out some extra edge highlighting on just a few things, like the top of markings, the top of nails or screws, so to leave the dry brush and kind of the edge highlighting alone in the lower areas, but to do a further kind of just an extra edge in some of the higher up tones. So to get kind of what I was trying to do, even on his fist, on camera, there we go. On focus in. There you go. You got a little extra edge highlighting on just the maw symbol and on the edges of the bracer from that fist. And then I'll go ahead and on the other bracer has some spikes. I may go ahead and pick up some of those as well. Just the tips of the spikes, or maybe an edge here or an edge there. Just to exemplify where the light's gonna catch and show off a little better that transition. also going to have to chain up this chain that he's carrying too. You get a little lead belcher on that chain. Happy little trees. It'll look okay. It'll look pretty low contrast until I get a shade in there to bring out the details in it. I do want the chain to look different than the bracers that are different from the metal pieces on the back. And even the little changes from how you shade to painting it black before applying the lead belcher to leaving the white primer and then applying the lead belcher. You can get a lot of different tonality, a lot of different color shifts that'll make your model look more organic or real without having to have 7,000 different tones of metal and knowing how to blend each one together. You can do some cheap or some more easy tricks. Like even when it comes to adding washes and shades to these, I may wash one once with Nuln Oil. I may wash one twice just to get a little bit of a different tonality in all the metal that's coming along. But I think that's at least the start of where he is. The last thing I think I'll do before I do washes and then details is that may paint the stripes on his armor pack and then or armor plates, and I'll paint the his hat, that kind of rice farmer hat. I don't think I'll do the details on the rice farmer hat. I think I'll ultimately try and stipple that on with a little sponge that I have, but I'm not 100% on that texture yet. How I'm going to achieve that texture. Brush. These are the the leather bands that are holding our pieces together. I think a little black touch on those leather bands, both from the top and from the sides, will help break up that armor pad a little bit, so you can see that I touched up the armor plate on his side with some black engraved padding. And I'm gonna go in with a orange, maybe a yellow orange wash in there to try and pull out a little more, and then maybe even a white dry brush to get to the edges of the plates. But that even just having that little black in there breaks up that pad a whole lot better. I'm gonna have to do the same thing to the armor plate on his chest and the other armor plate on his other shoulder, but getting in there. I think I got the one on his chest done. I'll be working on the one on his shoulder. And I'll have to check on something. This is just a pre-show for the conversion circle show that's going on later today, and I want to make sure that I have my guest Marcus, who is a master converter. I mean, as much of a master converter as you can be for Warhammer 40k. He's been converting models since before I was born, and he has won multiple awards from Adepticon and local tournaments all the way up to big tournaments like Adepticon. On his conversions, you could actually find pictures of his models online on even if you just Google Team Bad Decisions, you could find images from his Nurgle to his Khorne to his Orcs. Tons of conversion work all over the place, done very well. I think I'm gonna need to grab a lighter tan color for the hat to get a base color on that as well. Maybe a bone, Ushabti bone, I'm thinking, maybe. Okay, so I got both a Rakarth Flesh and a Screaming Skull, both from the GW line. The Screaming Skull is more of a tan. Let's see if I can get. No. Screaming Skull is more of a, or Screaming Skull more of a cream tan color, and the Rakarth Flesh has got more of a kind of a peach or an orange to it. I think I may go Screaming Skull for more of a tan. And I'm gonna try to do, because I've never done anything like this before, and ultimately I'm trying to achieve a texture of, or to look like texture of reeds that are all woven together, using paint. And I'm not 100% sure how this is going to turn out. But I think what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to base coat it the cream. I'm going to try and freehand pinstripe some of the line, or maybe I'll texture it or try and stipple texture it with a sponge lightly, some of the browns and the reeds of the hat, and then I will add some of the pinstripey lines to it. Like I said, you want the brightness of the model, lighter tones to be where you want the eyes of the person looking at it going to. So while I have the whites and the bright highlights on the dragon's face, and then it gets darker as it goes towards the dragon's belly, and then even towards the model of the guy, I'm going to have the darker tones at his feet, the blacks, the browns. The armor plates really pop the yellow up towards his midsection. I'll when you go to detailing, I'll detail his face, I'll detail his Fu Manchu out, and the lightness of his eyes, and the lightness of his hat. And then I do think I'm going to do a pink flower on the black background to exemplify the pink that's in his base. Bring that all kind of back together. I've noticed that I missed, with some of the lead belcher, I missed the bridle from the dragon. I missed the handheld uh, chain hold from the ogre, so I'm going to get both those things right now. I'll go back in with some bronze. Get this later. Try and change up the bridle a little bit. And this whole thing's a little bit of a work in progress with the dragon. It's my first big conversion project for this army, and it's the first model I've made for this army, so it's going to be big and flashy and kind of a centerpiece model. Get both these spots. I don't think that I'm going to leave them a silver lead belcher metal color, but if I'm going to work with the other GW metal lines, the bronze, the gold, they all work better when you apply a metal undercoat underneath. So I'm going to apply this lead belcher knowing that I'm going to paint over it with maybe a bronze or a Balthazar gold, something like that. Okay. So I think he's hit a point where he's good to start being washed. I'm gonna need to, repaint a lot of these bases as highlights after the washes anyway, so I may just get ready for the wash. The two paints I wash with the most is Nuln Oil from the GW line. I've also uses Vallejo Lavis Noir, which is kind of a Nuln Oil, but it behaves differently. So if you like the way the Vallejo paint, I have found shades the model better, where the Citadel shade actually washes the model better. You'll see the subtle differences in the way that those two things work. But when you're looking to have like the saddle brown versus the brown of his pants, you want to make them look different, even though they're both brown, but they're going to be slightly different and distinctable from the eye. You could just use the two different washes. I also want an organic wash, so I want the orange for the yellow armor pads and a brown wash as well. So I'm going to go pick those up. Okay, so to look at the orange wash that I'll be using today will be a Cassandora yellow shade and a Vallejo Umbra wash. I do like the Agrax Earthshade. I just happen to be out of it right now, so I will not be using Agrax Earthshade to shade that. Other thing is, before I shade, I want to add texture to the hat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a brush and get some of this brown paint. I'm going to paint it onto a piece of foam. Now this could be blister foam if you get your hands on anybody who is using blisters anymore. Or this is a piece of pluck foam from like when you buy the transport models foam that you can pull out pieces of. And I'm going to just kind of lightly stipple some brown onto see if that adds some texture into spots that I'm trying to add some texture to. I'm not 100% loving where that went. Give me a second. So I'm not sure I have the best idea in my head of what the final product needs to look like. So I'm going to pull up while I'm here. I'm going to use some Google Foo, and I'm going to pull up what one of these hats actually looks like. So ultimately I'm trying to get like correctly. Work if I drag and drop it? Oh. I'm going to try and get some sort... I've got a little image here of what I want that hat to look like. I'm going to use that image. So that's another thing. While you're painting, feel free to have stuff pulled up around you to look at, like, this is where I want to go with it. This is what I want it to look like. And feel free to use that to your advantage. I think it's only going to work. It's only going to end up looking like what I want it to end up like if I add the actual texture. So I may go back to correct the color. Then I'll go in with a knife or a putty knife. And since I made the hat out of green stuff to begin with, I can go in and actually texture the hat. So it looks like the textures of the hat are like interwoven reeds, which may be a very difficult thing to try and pull off. But while I'm waiting for that to dry, that fix to dry, I will up his base, start working on some of these, some of his base work. The base needs a little bit of help too on the wires for the fencing and for the tree, and a little bit of details around the windows, highlights for the wood. There's just a lot of little detail work that needs to... But I got enough done that I can go back to the model and see what kind of colors and what kind of details from the base I want to pull up into them. So right now I'm adding that lead belcher to a little bit of the interwoven chain between the each of the spokes of the fence. And I'm letting the model's hat dry so I can go through and try and fix texturing on that. It's coming out okay. It's gonna need a wash and um, some highlights, even of just the little fence detail. So I'm not sure the detail on the fences is gonna be a big enough deal that I need to worry about it so much with all the details. It's kind of getting the paint on the model and getting it to look the way that I want it to look. I'm not sure I need to go whole hog with it. I'll also probably start right after I finish painting this. I see the like fake bamboo that I'm trying to get going and get working with. I can paint that up too on the base. See how that will work. I think my head enough. I don't need to sit back normally like a normal human being. The brush is getting a little too loaded. I'm gonna need to dry it off. And the metallics have a tendency of like accumulating the little metallic flakes in your brush. So I like to try and clean my brush out every once in a while. Start with some new paint, new water, new brush tip. I find you get better control the tip of the brush that way. Then again, this is a very small detail on a very small piece of the base of a model that I don't think people are gonna look at a whole lot. But to me, I want to make sure it looks halfway decent. And now I'm gonna pick up that screaming skull texture again. I'm gonna try and get it on some of these pieces to make them look like bamboo. I don't think the screaming skull itself is going to look like bamboo, but I think it's a great base that when it gets shaded down will look like bamboo. I think I can get in with another color and This is the wrong brush for the job. I do not need this small little detail brush. Even though what I'm painting is a small little detail, I'm painting a bunch of these bamboo sticks right next to each other, and I could use a bigger brush. Not something that I think a lot of people are going to see, so almost like a dry brush, I'll get it. A lot quicker. And already that that white color from the wires, that just being gone, and more of a soft cream color from the paint, I think is very nice to the eyes to people looking. Especially being right next to the tree kind of being more of the symbol of what you want to look at. So it's kind of the twisted bamboo section of reeds that are coming up, and the little fence with the cherry tree. The cherry trees, I'm gonna need a brighter pink for it, for some of those cherry blossoms. I actually have a wasp nest that I painted pink in there that needs to get corrected. But other than that, I think a lot of good stuff, a lot of good starts going on right now. Base of this model. Okay, so worked on that for a second. We let the cream color dry on hat of the model. Now I could work back in here. I'm gonna work with like a modeling putty knife. I'm actually gonna get in there and try and form the textures that we were missing on this hat. There's two kind of textures that I'm missing. One is that I'm missing like the rings, like the concentric circle rings around each of the reeds. I'm also missing the individual kind of square crosshatch. I think I can get that shaped a little better if I actually just scratch up some of this hat. Add the texture to it. I get in there with that knife. Scratching. These lines will all kind of point to the center of the hat. And then I'll do patch and scratch lines along the hat too. Then when I shade, hopefully the hat picks up the shade picks up all the lines that I'm scratching in right now. So might be able to see kind of the vertical lines I'm scratching into the hat right now. This is done real lightly with the modeling knife. Not trying to cut through the green stuff that I've used. I'm just trying to score it, really. Trying to give model some texture so that the shade will pick up the shade will do the rest of the work. the hard lines are going to be here in towards where the banner was on the back of that model. They seem to have gotten almost all of the lines there that are vertically running up to the center of the hat. And now I kind of want to run, looks like from the picture they're like diagonal. I want to run these diagonally around the hat. I kind of want to make them consistent around. But then again, it does look like an ogre made the hat, so I don't need to be perfect. It's not like you're using the space elf technology where everything in the space elf culture is so pristine. They've been worried about making this. They spent their entire lives trying to perfect the art of making whatever they're making. They're artisans. This ogre probably made this hat in half a second. He picked it up off a mostly chewed body and had to try very hard not to eat himself. So I've adequately kind of scored up this hat. I think for the catch up on. Actually, the hat came off, so I'm gonna grab some glue to fix that. Then we'll go about. So for the glue that I'm using, I'm just using MaxiCure cyanoacrylate. It's not what I would use if the green stuff was still wet, but now that it's dry, just like another piece of plastic. Really, it's been a couple days since this green stuff was even malleable to begin with. I'm gonna place the hat back on his head. That this hat will be fine. Ready to paint. So it's all scored up. We got the texture looking kind of like what we want. And we'll go ahead and... Now, my shades, I use a lot of shade, so I don't usually put my shades on a wet palette just because of the amount I'll need out. I'll take up the whole wet palette with just all my different shades, so I'll put that on my ceramic tile and apply my brown shade to the... I'm hoping that the brown shade will get into the cracks and crevices and really show off all the detail in the texture of the hat. Because that way I'll go back over this with the lighter tone again in kind of a dry brush and pull all of the lighter areas and the non-scratches out. That's kind of like where I'm at with the washes. We did get the texture of the scratches coming in through the hat. And I think once that dries, because I'm gonna try and watch it while it dries and make sure the shade doesn't pool in areas that I don't want it to pool in, and just kind of show off the the scratches and scars and cracks in the hat. But even as it's drying now, you'll see it's pooling better and better in the hat. Show off those scratches we made. Another area, while I've got all this washout, that needs some touch-ups from earlier is the belly of the beast. I feel like I over dry brush some of the areas, so I need to bring those tones back around. While I had this washout, I might as well. Areas. Gonna go all the way down, even though there was only a couple areas I really wanted to hit or needed to hit. I am going to take this shade all the way down to the base of the tail, just so that it looks uniform the whole way through. Kind of shaded effect. All the it's on the base of the dragon or the belly of the dragon, so it's going to be hard for anyone to see. Also, if I'm going to wash, I mean, maybe, yeah. So I know I went through all the stages right there, but the pants should be washed in a brown as well. I'm going to go ahead while I have the brown wash available to me. Wash those pants. This will help a little. Get a little bit of depth. Color of the pants. Because they were looking a little one-dimensional. These small details we have to pull out from the pants, like the stitches and the folds and the highlights, but that'll be good for now. The other wash that I think is kind of imperative before we do the metal washing is the Asadona yellow wash on the yellow armor plate. Now this is a little bit of an orange wash, so I'm using the orange on the yellow, hopefully to pull in crevices, get kind of a yellow to orange fade. Now, another technique too I can look at is the finish of this model. Like, do I want it glossy? Do I want it matte? And you could target areas that you want people to look at with more of a glossy finish. So I may add some gloss finish to just the armor plates. So just the plated armor on him. See even that orange wash, it doesn't do a whole lot, and I'm gonna have to pick up some spots where it's pooling heavily, but it does add a little bit extra, a little bit of a warmer tone in between each of those plates. There was a little bit of extra pooling I want to. That's applying that wash. Go ahead and look at the Nuln Oil. A lot of people call Nuln Oil in my circle liquid talent just because of how easily something can look monotonal to applying one little brush of Nuln Oil to it, and you have a dynamic, shaded, somewhat highlighted piece that really draws people's attention and the eyes of people that are in the area. So I'm going to also apply Nuln Oil to the bracers that we highlighted earlier, the arm pieces, feet, these other bracers. There is one spot that is just bothering the heck out of me. I know that I said I wasn't going to go back and do touch-ups until the time to do touch-ups, but I can't not hit this spot. Every time I look at it, my blood pressure goes up a little bit, so I go in. It's a spot kind of on the top of this armor plate. Gotta get in there. Does seem better. Got it. Well, now that the shade is in, I'm going to go back on the opposite side of the shade. So the shade was in the crevice. On the upper part, I'm going to add a little bit more of that same yellow color. Just bring out the edge a little more. Now this technique of using a color, shading that color down, and then using that same color again to bring out as a highlight is very simple, and it allows people who don't have 10,000 colors of paint to be able to create a dynamic range of colors without needing like a bunch of different colors to start with. So like you'll see that while I did start with a orange undertone and a yellow, all of the yellow highlights have all been the same color of yellow. It's all been Flash Gets Yellow, and it does look like there's more tones to it than just the basic yellow. Now the ogre has in my brushes, I have a tendency of leaving brushes out because I know that I'm not done with dry brushing or not done with washing, so I'll leave the brush out. But I really need to clean the brush and put it away take care of the stuff that I have. But back onto, so he has kind of a maw symbol on his gauntlet, and he's got a flower on his banner, both of which I think would be perfect to have that pink color come in from the base. I think that I'm going to finish up, before I show you guys again what the armor plates look like now, I think I'm going to finish up the last shoulder plate with some of these highlights, and then as we get closer and closer to 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, I'll have to keep an eye out for Marcus, who should be joining me today for a little bit of our show. I think the show today will be also on conversions, how to convert models, what models would look like. Hey, no Matt. Yeah, we're doing Marcus wanted to do a show later today in like an hour or so, and I was just hobbying until the show with Marcus, so I figured I'd just jump on and paint a little bit, convert a little bit, hang out with anybody who was looking to do so. Talk to myself. Are you doing any hobby stuff yourself? Got a little detail in here. I'm gonna try and get this guy's Fu Manchu working out. Now, this Fu Manchu's hard because I'm gonna. It's small, like it's a very small piece of the model I have to paint. What are you working on, Matt? Are you like, is there something in particular you're painting up, or is it just kind of touching things up on a lot of different stuff? But the Fu Manchu is hard because it's hidden away under the hat, and I don't want to make it like I don't want to highlight it too much because I could highlight it a lot and then bring the detail out like I want to because I want to make it stand out. But if I highlight it too much, it's going to look unrealistic because it's kind of shaded under that hat. So I think what I'll try and do is I'll highlight just the tips of it because the tips will be kind of out from underneath the shade of the hat. Maybe I don't really know. I think I'm gonna. It's one of those things like with a lot of this model. I'm gonna try some stuff. We'll see how it works. Like when we did the hat earlier, we stippled it with the sponge, and then we were like, ugh, no, that looks bad. That looks real bad. And we went back and added texture and then shaded it, and it looks a lot better. I think that's another thing with this Fu Manchu. We're gonna have to try some stuff, work some stuff out, see what it looks like, come back to it. Okay, so working on teeth right now. I'm trying to get in there, get some of the teeth, lighten up a little bit of some of the details on his face. Get in a little bit of his eyes. So I kind of know what's going on up there. I also want to go in with a lighter red, kind of outline the tops of his muscles, highlight in there. It's going to be a real hard contrast of a red, like a real light red compared to the base contrast red that I did for the skin. But I find that if I get a real light highlight in there, even a white, if I tried a real white highlight, and then went back and washed it, it'll wash it together better. Sorry, I'm reading Matt's thing. So he's prioritizing custode vehicles, 9 grav tanks, 5 dreadnoughts, more nonsense, and personal project assembling 3 keepers of secrets. So basically, like, for your commission, did he just like buy you a couple rattle cans of gold spray paint? Like that's just what you're gonna do to touch everything up? Because that seems like so much gold. We get the weather and edge highlight, 3,000 points of custode vehicles. That sucks. Uh, Also, because weather and edge highlighting is difficult and time consuming. Because it's kind of what I'm doing right now, is edge highlighting. But it's even more so when it's all vehicles, and that 3,000 points of custodes is going to be darn near 4,000 points of custodes when 9th edition drops. So he's gonna pay you for a bunch of models and then realize he's gonna have to cut back some of those models just to be able to play. I need some fingernails too. While I had that color on the paintbrush, I should have touched up that. So we talked about earlier when I just started painting that I might make this guy's hand gloved. Or that it may be too much red and too much yellow. We actually referred to this guy as the McDonald's Warrior for a little while, just because of only having the red and yellow on him. But as I show him in a second, I think we've moved past that. I think the red from the arm going into the hand actually looks more organic and good now than it did before. And I don't need to use gloves because the three spots of yellow, the three armor pads on him, I think look organic and they look, well put on instead of having to deal with like it looking like a mustard and ketchup kind of deal. So I think the pants helped pull that neutrality in there. The hat definitely helped. And then just shading everything down and highlighting everything up to get more tones in there than the single tone yellow, single tone red, I think helped a lot as well. So now we'll go in and I think I'm gonna edge highlight. I'm gonna join Nurgle Matt in his tour of duty edge highlighting. Oh, before I do that, I need to open up the chat to see when Marcus is gonna pop in. He said anytime between 4 and 4:30, so okay. So I got news from him. So he just got home.